Hello, this is my review of the Nikon 55mm f3.5 micro Nikkor lens. I've had it for a little while now, just renting it. It's not a buy, but I had so much fun using this lens. Um, it's in a weird spot in that there's probably a very small subset of people that I would actually recommend this to, but if you're one of those people, highly recommend it. But I'll get into the pros and cons once we start looking at some photos. Before I get into the review, I just want to preface this as this was really my first experience long term with my macro lenses. I've messed around with them before when other people just had them around, and that was fun, but I've never really gotten to get into the weeds with it. So if you're familiar with macro lenses, some of the stuff I'm saying is going to be pretty obvious. I'm going to do my best to segregate my opinions on this lens specifically and its macro capabilities, its focal range, its f-stop, that kind of stuff. I'm going to try to keep those as separate as I can and make it very clear when I'm talking about one or the other. Okay, let's take a look at some photos. Okay, so here's the first shot that I took. This is on auto. I normally keep it on auto when I'm driving for obvious reasons. But here, we can take a look. So the first thing I noticed when I was shooting with this is super sharp. Very great detail, very clean image. You can see the threads in her shirt. This was just a quick fire. This wasn't, I didn't really take time to line this up. I was just excited to have the lens. So this is right outside the camera store. Okay. One thing that this image is a good example of, that is something that I don't really like about this lens, is the bokeh bubbles. Very high contrast. So on some lenses, the glass will have like a softer fall off in the bubbles, but you can see there's just points of high contrast in this dark area from this tree. You can just like you see what I'm talking about. Personally, I like having this aesthetic as an option in my toolkit, not necessarily something that I'm going to want to have to work around on a regular basis. Colors are good. This is kind of, is there anything on this? Yeah, there's nothing on this. This is straight out of camera. This is in auto, so there is a little bit of color correction and a little bit of white balance. Let's keep moving. All right, so this is stop down. Sorry, you'll have to excuse me. This lens was kind of dirty. It's an old lens, so what are you going to do? A little stop down. You can see even at stop down, the sharpness is just, for a vintage lens, it's immaculate. I hesitate to use that term, but the sharpness is probably the major selling point of this lens. This is opened up a bit. Yeah, you can see the dirt. Wide open at 3.5. We're losing a little bit. I think I even lost focus when it probably touched the scroll wheel, touched the focus wheel, something. One thing, again, this is more specific about macro lenses and not this lens specifically. I shoot on an A6400, which does not have image stabilization. So using a macro lens by hand, very hard, very hard. You can also see what I was talking about, the sharp fall off on the bokeh bubbles. Aesthetically, it looks okay. I mean, again, it's a fun aesthetic. I really like having access to it, not something I want to have to work around. Here, I have a good example with a piano here. Yeah. So at 3.5, you're not really getting that much light. And at f3.5 on a macro lens, your light cone is tiny. So you really need well-lit subjects. if I was going to be investing in a macro lens, I'd probably want something that has a bit wider aperture, because I regularly found myself needing to either adjust ISO or shutter speed to compensate for the low light that things are hitting. This image is not at its minimum focus distance, so it's not necessarily a true example of what I'm trying to say. But because there was so much light being reflected off of the piano, I was able to get a really clear image. And that was something I was struggling with a lot with this lens. But again, sharpness out of control. Beautiful sharpness. One of the downsides with this lens is I believe this was this was aimed at the professional market. I don't think this was a hobbyist lens. I could be wrong. It is Nikon. But I don't think this was a hobbyist lens when it came out. It doesn't feel like an art lens. It doesn't feel like a hobbyist lens. It feels like the goal they had when they were putting this glass together was sterile, clinical, sharpness, flat balance, flat color profile. And it shows. It checks all of those boxes. But comparing it to modern lens offerings, it's not the best of any of those. And to be honest, it's not really competing. The quality of lenses in those categories has gone up so much since this lens was released that if you're looking for that, it's worth investing a little bit more for a more modern lens. So when I was in the intro, I was saying it's hard to recommend this lens to a wide group of people, because if you're trying to use it for a professional context, it's outclassed by modern lenses. If you're trying to use this as a hobbyist, it's good. It's really good. And if you already have a wide breadth of a lens collection, this is a really nice addition to it for like fun and enjoyment and hobbyist images. But one of the reasons I love vintage lenses is the character. The character gives you restrictions that you have to work around, and restriction breeds creativity. So the restrictions that this lens gives you is just its clinical sterility. It's just a very flat, consistent image, which is good. Don't get me wrong. That's a plus, not a minus. But it's not what I go out of my way to look for vintage lenses for. One thing I haven't mentioned yet is the chromatic aberration that this lens has. It handles it beautifully, especially for an older lens. You can see we've got a little bit of blue fringing, a little bit of greens here. This is wide open, by the way. And then on the foreground, we've got a little bit of reds. But it's so minor. For a lens this old, they did a great job handling chromatic aberration. One thing I have found, let's keep moving through images while I'm talking. Again, I had to lower my shutter speed so much that I was not able to get actually a consistent image out of this, a consistent shot. But I want to use this as an example to see how much zoom there is, or how much. So that is this. Yeah, this is probably the size of my fist, and then that's this. So when I picked up the macro lens, I had assumed most of my time with the lens was going to be in macro, but it's actually a really great general purpose lens. You're going to hear me say it 1,000 times. The sharpness is just amazing. I'm used to working with older lenses, and I don't really get access to levels of sharpness like this. But for the style of photography that I aim for, it's not necessarily a priority for what I'm doing. I kind of like having all of the characteristics of the lens make a less than perfect image, but because I'm so used to using those older lenses without the sharpness, having access to the sharpness for a little while was really fun. Getting to flesh it out, getting to build around it was really fun to work with. I just also, side note, I love this house. I 90% certain it's not abandoned. Like, these are all potted plants. You can see somebody is watering all of these plants, but I just love this plant core aesthetic, this sun core aesthetic. There's a couple houses like this around Hanoi where they're just not I don't want to say run down because this is decisive aesthetic. Um, but they're just hyper focused on overflowing with plants. Like I'm really curious what the inside of this balcony looks like. But yeah. Oh, that's what I was forgetting. The color profile on this lens is not 100% flat. This image, let me turn off processing. Actually, we can just go over one. This image is shot on a flat color profile, as flat as I can get on an A6400. And you'll notice the reds are a little undersaturated because this is the reds are a little bit under. Oh, I lost it. Reds are a little bit undersaturated. Magenta, a little oversaturated. I wouldn't say oversaturated, but just more saturated than blues, than greens, than yellows, and reds. Magenta, I found in all of my images, kind of pops a little bit more, which is okay. It's just something to be aware of when you have the lens. Let's see. Do I have another? Yeah, here's with processing. Okay, my camera battery just died, so it's probably about 2 hours later. I had to go get some lunch. So I might repeat myself a little bit. Excuse me if that happens. Back to the picture we left off on these. I was about to start explaining. I love taking flower pictures. It's not necessarily that I enjoy looking at flowers, which I do, but it's more a very good technical subject to practice elements of photography. Hitting your focus point, balancing contrast, light balance, white balance, all that, composition. So when I got a macro lens, I was really excited to take flower pictures. But because I don't have image stabilization in my camera, you look at these. When you're taking flower pictures, I believe this is called the pistula. This is the point of highest contrast in most flowers. In all of these, I missed it. I mean, I didn't mean to hit this one, but you can see this should be the focal point of this image. And it just blurred out, which was a little frustrating, not gonna lie. And I'm not trying to go out and bring a tripod with me when I do my street photography, which is another reason why I didn't end up keeping this lens, is because it's a little high maintenance. Although, tangentially, I revel in the ridiculousness that is street photography, and bringing a macro lens out and just standing there staring at your subject inches away from a flower or just a brick wall and having people just stare at you is just, I don't know, it's something, it's absurdist. I quite enjoy it. And this lens has that in spades, because there is very few things more ridiculous than trying to do macro photography on the side of a busy road. So just for some context, this flower is this. So I'm probably zoomed in right on that one or that one. Yeah, if you just for a sense of scale. Here I did end up getting a good shot. It's not exactly framed how I'd like. The focal point is not exactly framed, but you can see great levels of sharpness. It just pops out at you. Great image separation. The fall off. My context is, I always compare vintage lenses. Like my context of comparison is the Takumar 50-1.4. My favorite lens, my everyday carry. I mean, aside from, yeah, my favorite lens. It's bokeh fall off, like the transition from in focus to out of focus is it's got a very interesting curve to it. Like not necessarily like visual curves, but it slowly falls off and then gets very out of focus. You could see this is much more linear. I mean, I don't have any comparison for you, but you have to trust me. This is a very linear fall off. So we can see that it's just, we almost have a V in the focus on this straight line. Again, what this lens is trying to do is be very surgical and clinical. So this is a very clean bokeh fall off. Not necessarily something that I'm looking for. In the theme of this review, it is a plus for its lens and build quality. But for me personally, it's not necessarily something that I'd be looking for. And you could, I'm just now realizing this was stopped down because you could see how dirty the lens was. Missed it. Here's a good one. Still, this was on the side of the road on a bright sunny day in auto, because I was in high intensity environments. I like to just keep it in auto. And you could see my shutter speed drop down. So this would be an in-focus image, but my shutter speed had to be slow enough to capture enough light. So I probably should have switched over to manual for this one. But again, with the macro lens zoomed all the way in, I don't know if zoom's the right term, but with the macro lens all the way in, at f3.5, it's just not enough light to do most things without some additional lighting. And for context, this is that flower. Beautiful flower. I don't know what it's called, but they're all over here. And then I was driving and I just saw this pagoda just hidden in the forest. Let's see. Yeah, none of these really show off the lens. Oh, good contrast on this one. We can see the chromatic aberration again. Very minimal. It does exist. On modern lenses, it would probably be a little bit less noticeable. Very easy to fix and post if you're using a digital camera, and not distracting at all. The way this lens handles chromatic aberration is just wonderful. There we go. This one's processed. So you can see kind of a neutral color profile. Its blues are a little undersaturated. Reds, I'd say this is a normal amount of saturation. And then you can see when, I would say this is a normal amount of saturation. Orange is a normal amount of saturation. Blues are a little undersaturated. And like I said before, magenta surprisingly pops a little bit more than you would expect. I believe. Oh, here's another. This is this style of photography I quite enjoy. This is a really well lit area, and because I'm, not fully zoomed in, I'm getting enough light, so I can actually have a reasonable shutter speed. This was swaying in the wind. It was a very light wind, but it was swaying in the wind. But I was able to get a shutter speed fast enough to capture it. And I enjoy the bokeh fall in, fall out in this image a little bit more than on the ultra close. Oh, here's something I didn't bring up yet. This lens is long enough, quite long. I don't have it with me right now, but it's quite long. Blocks the flash on my my camera. Yeah, I'm on an A6400, like I said. The built-in flash is too low to actually cover the full image with such a large lens. Mind you, I had an adapter on here. Without the adapter, it'd probably be okay, but I'd have focal length issues. Definitely something to keep in mind. If I had flash working, like properly, I think the lighting issues that I've been talking about would be a lot easier to work around. But because flash, I can't really use flash. I lose 1/5, 1/6 of the image. Something to definitely keep in mind. One thing I really did enjoy, though, is just finding these little textures. This is, I believe this is on this bird. Yeah, this is part of this bird. This is the wings on this bird. Uh, but you can get some really like abstract, just, I don't know. It's this image specifically because, oh, there's the low shutter speed. I don't know. I enjoy this style of image. It's very abstract. I wish the dirt wasn't there. Um, but it's got an interesting feel to it. Not necessarily subject-based photography. Here again, you can see I'm stopped down because we're not circular. Um, but I really enjoy this kind of image. This is something I would love to have framed on my wall. It's not necessarily the most beautiful thing, but it's, I don't know, with the macro lens, you're able to get some very abstract artwork. And yeah, and I quite enjoy it. Let's see. Yeah. Oh, and then food photography. This might be a little gross for some people. I don't know. It looks a little slimy, but I really enjoyed just finding the micro textures and things. Like you can see these green onions. Here are some samples that I took with this lens. This is where it really shined. I could make a whole Instagram account just based off of using this lens and finding interesting things to film and making little short snippets. I don't really ever seeing the capabilities of this lens lending to a story, lending to a narrative, but in short form content, it can make some very interesting visuals. If you do plan on using this for video, I highly recommend putting it on a body that is stabilized or committing to only use a tripod. It is very, very hard to keep a steady hand when your subject is 1 centimeter. Overall, I really enjoyed this lens. I had so much fun with it. How much of that is me never having used a macro lens before and how much of it is this lens specifically is up for debate. This lens specifically, very fun. The highlights, no pun intended, that I would like to relay to anyone thinking about picking this up, it's very clean, very sterile in the context of vintage lenses, very sharp. If you're planning on doing art, or stills, art stills, or anything that doesn't really take advantage of its macro capabilities, probably want to look for a different one. If your goal is to pick up a macro lens on a budget, this is a great option. It feels like a professional grade lens from a couple of decades ago, which is what it is. If you're aiming for the highest image quality or making a professional product, this is probably below the threshold of usability. There are still some issues with, like I said, the sharpness of the bokeh. It can be very distracting. It's not very smooth. The color rendering is not a perfectly flat balance. But if your goal is to go out on the weekend and take pictures of bugs and leaves and flowers, I cannot recommend this enough. It was so much fun. Doing my research for this lens, there's a huge Instagram community of macro photography and macro videography, cinematography, yeah, whatever. Which was really cool to have a little peek into. So, who is this lens for? This lens is for an enthusiast on a budget. I can't recommend it for professional use, even in an artistic context. There are not enough flaws to make it a bold visual decision, and there are too many flaws to use in product photography, in something that you're going to need high resolution images of. So very small, very thin slice of consumer that I would recommend this to. If you're looking to expand your vintage lens collection and you need a macro lens or want a macro lens in your tool belt, You're going to be very, very happy with this. It is super fun. I'm sure I've said that 1,000 times in this video, but I had so much fun just running around Hanoi with that. Okay, that's the end of the review. I just wanted to say thank you to all the returning viewers. I started this channel around the time that we found out my wife was pregnant, and I haven't uploaded a video in about 2 years. The baby, not really a baby anymore, is studying daycare, which is great. So I've got a little bit more time on my hands, and I realized this channel is still getting 500 to 800 views a month, 24 months after I posted my last video. So I just want to say thank you guys for the continued support. Yeah, 100 subscribers. When I stopped paying attention to this channel, when I found out my wife was pregnant, I think it was 30. So yeah, that's great. Yeah, hope you all have a great day. Thank you so much for watching this far.